multiplying and dividing fractions. So let's start with multiplication. Now some of you may find this a lot simpler than adding and subtracting. I know I do. Some of you may find it more difficult. Okay, but we're going to learn the steps. So for multiplying fractions, our first step is to multiply the numerator times the numerator and the denominator times the denominator. Then we simplify. So let's try an example. So for my example, I have 2/3 and I'm multiplying it by 4/5. So I have my numerator times my numerator, so my 2 times 4 on the top, my denominator times my denominator on the bottom, so my 3 times 5 on the bottom. 2 times 4 is 8, 3 times 5 is 15. Notice my equal signs line up. I only have one equal sign per line. I want you to show this step to show me your work. Okay, and 8/15 is my final answer. I don't need to simplify because that is my answer in its simplest form. 8 and 15 share no common factor for dividing and reducing any further. But what is 2/3 over 4/5 really? Well, it really is what is 2/3 of 4/5. So if I had a shape, let's have a nice rectangle here, and I'm dividing my shape into fifths, pretend that they are even. I have 4/5 shaded in. Now I want to know what is 2/3 of these 4/5. So let's now divide my shape into thirds in the opposite direction. So now I have it thirds going horizontally. And let's shade in 2 of those thirds. Okay, so if I blocked off this one column that we're not really using, so I'm only looking at my 4/5, you can see 2/3, so here's 1, 2, 3 rows. 2 of those 3 rows, so 2/3 of my 4/5 is shaded in. But I'm not just asking for that, because that answer would really just be 8 out of 12, which reduces to 2/3. I need to look at the whole picture. So the whole picture here, I have 15 parts, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them are doubled up. So 2/3 of 4/5 is 8 out of 15. Okay, let's look at division. My first step for division is I need to invert the second fraction. It's very important that you only ever invert the second fraction. Okay, so inversions of fractions, say I had 2/3. So to invert this, my denominator becomes my new numerator, and my numerator becomes my new denominator. So I end up with 3/2. My second step, I'm going to now multiply. So there's something different. I'm no longer dividing, I'm now multiplying using the 2 steps above. So up here, multiply numerator times numerator over denominator times denominator, and simplify. So let's try an example. So if I had 1/3, and I was dividing my 1/3 by 2/5, I'm going to first invert this second fraction. So my 1/3 stays the same. My 2/5 becomes 5/2, and instead of dividing, I'm now multiplying. Multiply my numerators on the top, so 1 times 5 on the top. My denominators on the bottom, so 3 times 2 on the bottom. 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 2 is 6. This cannot be reduced any further, so 5/6 is my final answer. But what is 1/3 divided by 2/5 really asking us? So if I wanted to understand what this question is really asking me, okay, it's really asking me how many 2/5 of my whole figure fit into 1/3. Okay, so it's also if I had 1/3 of my entire figure and I want to divide it by 2/5 of my entire figure, so figure out how many groupings of 2/5 fit into that 1/3. Okay, so let's look at a diagram here. So here's my diagram. So let's first divide my diagram into thirds. So here is 1/3. Okay, so this is what I'm looking at. How many 2/5 go into 1/3? So here is 1/3. Now let's divide my diagram into fifths, just like we did before. So we're going to divide horizontally now. 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I were to shade in 2/5, I would shade in here and here. But I'm trying to find how many 2/5 go into 1/3. So having these 4 spaces here that aren't overlapping with any of my orange isn't really going to help me. So let's move. I have 1, 2, 3 orange spaces left. So I can move 1, 2, 3 of these over to an orange space. So now I have all 5 of my orange spaces are colored up. They're all filled up. And I have 1 of these free spaces left over. So the yellow represents my 2/5. So out of my 2/5, I can fit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts of my 2/5, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts, into 1/3. So my answer is 5/6 because I have 5 parts here. So here are my 5 parts. There's my 5. And my yellow combined, all my yellows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because these ones, remember, we moved these. So I have 5 out of the 6 parts of my 2/5 fit into my 1/3. Move on to the next video for some more examples.